There is a tribe alive today that has killed almost every outsider who has ever set foot on our land, not out of hatred, out of memory. Their home is a small island in the Bay of Bengal, roughly the size of Manhattan, covered in dense forest that has never been mapped up close. No drone has flown low enough to get a clear shot. No anthropologist has ever had a conversation with them. Every attempt to get close has ended the same way: spears, arrows, sometimes death, and every single time, the tribe has won. We call them the Sentinelese, but that's our name for them, not theirs. We don't actually know what they call themselves. We don't know their language, we don't know their customs, their beliefs, or their history. After more than 100 years of trying, we know almost nothing. And that's not an accident. That's the point. In 1880, a British colonial officer named Maurice Vidal Portman decided to fix this. He led an expedition onto the island, determined to make peaceful contact. His men found an elderly couple and 4 children, and brought them back to the mainland as a kind of experiment, hoping kindness might open a door. Within weeks, the elderly couple was dead. Colonial doctors believed they had no immunity to common outside diseases, something as ordinary as a cold. The children survived and were sent back to the island, carrying with them most likely the same illnesses that had just killed their parents. Nobody knows exactly how many islanders died in the aftermath, but the pattern was set. Contact wasn't just dangerous, it was lethal, in ways nobody outside the island had to witness directly. That single expedition may explain almost everything that came after. For the next 100 years, the world tried again and again. Anthropologists in the 1970s and 80s attempted what they called gift-giving expeditions. They'd approach by boat, drop coconuts and metal tools on the beach, and retreat. Sometimes the islanders took the gifts. Sometimes they shot arrows at the boat while it was still delivering them. In 2004, after a tsunami devastated coastlines across the region, an Indian Coast Guard helicopter flew over the island to check on survivors. A lone man ran out onto the beach, drew his bow, and aimed it directly at the helicopter. Not injured, not desperate, just angry that they had come. In 2006, 2 fishermen drifted too close to shore while sleeping in their boat. They were killed almost immediately. When a helicopter was sent to recover the bodies, it was driven off by arrows before it could land. And in 2018, an American missionary named John Chow paid local fishermen to take him near the island at night. He believed he'd been called by God to bring Christianity to the last uncontacted people on earth. He wrote in his journal the night before that he might die trying. The next morning, he did, killed on the beach within minutes of stepping on the sand. Every single one of these stories gets told the same way in the news, as a tragedy, as proof of how hostile, how violent, how frightening this tribe must be. But that reading misses almost everything that's actually going on, because the Sentinelese aren't reacting out of blind aggression, they're reacting out of something closer to institutional memory, a memory passed down generation after generation of exactly what happens when outsiders arrive: disease, kidnapping, death that follows you home even after the visitors leave. They don't need written history to know this. Anthropologists who study isolated and semi-isolated groups across the world have found the same thing over and over. Oral tradition can carry a warning across centuries with startling accuracy, especially when the warning is this simple: when strangers come, people die. And the tribe has good reason to believe it because it's happened to almost every other neighboring group that ever let outsiders in. The Great Andamanese, a related population living elsewhere in the same island chain, made contact with the British in the 1800s. Before that contact, their population was estimated at several thousand people, spread across multiple tribes. Within decades, disease, violence, and displacement had reduced them to a few dozen individuals. Entire languages, entire lineages simply stopped existing. The Onge, another nearby tribe, allowed limited contact through the 20th century. Their population collapsed by more than 80% from diseases they had never been exposed to before, illnesses that outsiders barely noticed carrying. The Sentinelese watched this happen, not necessarily with satellite footage or written reports, but through generations of contact or near contact along the same island chain. Every other group that opened the door lost almost everything. The Sentinelese, as far as we can tell, are the only ones who never did. So when a helicopter approaches or a boat gets too close, the response isn't confusion or blind panic. It's closer to a fire alarm, a learned, rehearsed, absolutely certain response to a threat that has historically always been real. In 1996, the Indian government made a decision that changed everything. After decades of failed contact attempts, sometimes friendly, sometimes violent, officials concluded that the safest thing for everyone, especially the Sentinelese, was to stop trying entirely. India declared the island off limits. No visits, no photography, no research expeditions, a no-contact policy, backed by law, patrolled by the Navy from a distance, close enough to prevent outsiders from landing, far enough to leave the island completely alone. This wasn't done to preserve them like a museum exhibit. It was done because contact, historically, has functioned almost like a death sentence, mediated by microbes the islanders have never built immunity to. A common cold could tear through their population in weeks. Measles could do it in days. Isolation isn't cutting them off from progress. It's the only thing that has kept them alive. Which raises an uncomfortable question. What do they actually know that we've completely forgotten? They've never had electricity, agriculture, or writing, and by most modern measures, that would define them as behind us in some line of progress we assume we've been walking together. But it's not clear that's the right way to think about it at all. The Sentinelese have survived uninterrupted on the same island using the same fundamental way of life for an estimated 60,000 years, longer than agriculture has existed, longer than cities, longer than most languages spoken anywhere on Earth today. Every other human society that has ever existed has been through collapse, conquest, migration, or reinvention, sometimes many times. The Sentinelese, as far as anyone can tell, have simply continued. Same island, same forest, same knowledge passed mouth to mouth for thousands of generations. They know things about that specific island, its plants, its currents, its dangers, that no outsider will ever learn, because learning it would require exactly the kind of contact that would destroy them. We tend to assume that not knowing things is a kind of poverty, but the Sentinelese don't know about smartphones, stock markets, or the news cycle, and they have also never needed a vaccine for a disease we brought to their beach. Their ignorance of us is not a gap. In their case, it might be the single reason they still exist at all. We built cities, we built medicine, we built the entire modern world, and in doing that, we also built diseases, systems, and habits that would have ended them the moment they let us in. They didn't reject progress out of fear, they rejected it because every single time in recorded history, progress arrived on their beach carrying something that killed them. So the next time you hear about the Sentinelese, about an arrow fired at a helicopter or a missionary killed on the sand, remember what's actually happening. That isn't a mystery. That isn't blind hostility. It's a memory, older than agriculture, older than writing, older than almost anything else alive on Earth. And it has kept them safe from every single thing that has destroyed a society like theirs. We spent the last several thousand years building everything we have, and somewhere in the Bay of Bengal, a small group of people looked at everything we built and decided, generation after generation, arrow after arrow, that none of it was worth what it would cost them. We call that isolation. They might just call it surviving.